Hello everybody, my name is Kat Bowser. I'm your resident fantasy therapist and welcome to my channel. Those of you who are returning, thank you, welcome back. Those of you who are brand new, my name is Kat Bowser and I'm a licensed therapist and I'm also an author working on my first debut novel, Coexist Division. So on my channel I like to give you guys all sorts of little tidbits about not only my work in progress but also the writing process in general, from character development, world building, and everything and anything in between. So this is actually my third video on character development. I have two others, which I will link in the description below if you guys are interested. And everybody does character development differently. I personally use a technique called the 5Ws+1, which is who, what, where, when, why, and how. And I run each character through each one of these little categories, and that's how I help develop my characters. Now, this is by no means a one-stop shop. I think that it's always useful to use several different techniques when you're developing your characters, but I thought I would share this with you guys. So this week we are on the last section, which I purposely left for last because I think it is one of the most important, and that is the why. So why is strictly motivation, your character's motivation. And motivation is a very tricky topic because honestly, they are still having arguments over what constitutes motivation. So I could honestly probably go on for 2 hours about motivation, but I'm going to try and limit it to about 15 minutes. If you guys are more interested in some of the topics I bring up, please let me know and I'll be glad to expand on that for you. So basically, motivation is what drives a behavior, what causes an organism, or in this case, a character, to act a certain way. Those of you who have even a sampling of psychology, I'm sure you've heard of Freud. His idea was that we are driven by either aggression or sex. And while we find that not entirely true, there is some truth to it in that we are driven by survival techniques. We are driven by a desire to promote ourselves, promote our genes. So on that level, he was kind of right, but it's a little more complicated than just simply sex or aggression. We actually typically divide motivation into two categories, and that is internal and external. So external motivation is anything outside of a person that causes them to behave a certain way, either reward or punishment, essentially. So, for example, if you are someone who you want to get your character to, let's say, I'm going to use like a child, for example. You want to get a child to do a certain chore, then you can offer a reward, let's say like candy or a trip to the beach or something along those lines after a certain number of completed days. That's called external motivation. Child doesn't really want to do the chores, probably doesn't see any point to them, but the reward at the end is what's going to make them do it. Now that typically that works for adults as well, actually. In fact, most programs actually have what they call a token economy, which is basically where for every group or every treatment that you attend, you earn coins or tokens, and those can be exchanged for goods, things that people like. Usually the things like sodas, household items, things of that nature. So that is typically external motivation. Internal is where things get a little more interesting, and I personally love to focus on internal more than external. So internal is where the character is getting something for doing what they do. And usually this is built onto morals. What kind of morals does your character have? What is important to them? What is something that they feel is their job to promote? What is it their job to fight against? That kind of thing. And one way that I personally like to look at motivation is I actually use what's called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Those of you who have not heard of it, I'm going to just give you an extremely brief version of it. So basically, it's the idea that every individual has a certain set of needs that need to be met before we can build on ourselves and grow. So at the very, very bottom is basic survival mechanism: food, water, shelter. That's at the very, very bottom. Second tier, safety and security. So it's basically, do I have a safe place to live? Am I not going to be hurt? The third tier is actually the third and fourth tier. People tend to interchange them because they really can't agree which one to come first. So I just like to mention them both together. And that is friendship and belonging. And it is also a sense of, I'm trying to think of a way to phrase it that makes the most sense. So basically, you have belonging to someone, belonging to a group, but then you also have self love and self care. So caring about yourself, caring about your own self esteem. And then from there, you can move up to the next tier, which is basically expanding your education, expanding your own sense of the world. And at the very, very top is what they call actualization, which is essentially being at peace with yourself. And according to Maslow, and I'm probably saying his name wrong, so I'm just going to apologize right now if I'm saying his name wrong. At the very, very top is self-actualization, which is basically where you are totally at peace with yourself and at peace with the universe. And essentially, I've heard it phrased as one with the universe. And not many people get to that point. So usually when I'm talking about characters, I'm talking usually about the first four tiers, like maybe second to fourth most of the time. So how can I use this for characters? Well, I typically like to look from bottom to top. So first thing I want to look at is, okay, does my character have motivation to get food? Does he have motivation to get water, shelter? Is this something that he does not usually have? And the reason this is important is because if your character does not have food, does not have water, does not have shelter, their mind is not going to be on anything else. Because if those are not met, they cannot think of anything else. Same thing with the next tier, safety and security. If they are not safe, then their thoughts are going to be completely preoccupied with how can I make myself safe? I need to make myself safe. Because if you're not safe, your adrenaline is pumping. It is always running. You are always looking for danger. You're always looking for, okay, how can I get myself to a point where I will not have to be looking over my shoulder all the time? This is actually why people who have PTSD often have a lot of trouble, because they have what we call an exaggerated startle reflex. Their adrenaline is on overdrive. Their adrenaline is stuck on the on position, because as far as their mind is concerned, their mind has not processed that whatever trauma they have been through is done. It does not process, it is stopped. So their mind is constantly on survival mode. What can I do to keep myself safe? So if you have a character who is in the wilderness and who is under threat by, I don't know, trolls or vampires or whatever it is, you're not going to get a lot of philosophical conversation out of them. You might get some, but you're not going to really get a lot, because that's not what their focus is right now. And then I go on to the third and fourth tier. Once the safety and everything is secured, okay, now we can get into, okay, what is something they want to build on? Is my character suffering from low self-esteem? Is my character suffering from they don't really have a place in society? Do they really have friends? Do they really have family? Then I can focus on that. So with that said, there is one other trick I use to develop these two tiers, and it really relates to fear, actually, because fear is what I have found the best way to find out what your character cares about. And the reason for that is because fear is all centered around loss of some sort. Fear of, let's say, for example, fear of heights. It's not really the heights that scares the person, it's the fear of falling. The heights they're okay with as long as they're completely safe. It's the fear of falling that gets to them. Same thing with, like, for example, let's use a common fear, children, fear of the dark. And it's not the dark, it's what they can't see that might be in the dark. So that is a loss of security. And then even something as simple as, I don't usually use phobias in this area because phobias are irrational fears, but since some of them can be based off of rational fear, I'll use that. So like a fear of spiders, for example. We actually think a lot of that phobia actually comes from years ago when humans were in danger of poisonous animals and poisonous snakes, insects. So it made sense. Hey, I need to be afraid of something that might kill me. So we think that's where some of that comes from. But again, that goes back to fear of loss of security, fear of loss of life. It's all related to loss. So I like to start with, okay, what is something that my character is deathly afraid of? And I do this because honestly, writers, we are a very sadistic bunch. We are very mean to our characters. Most of the time, even if we may not know what their main goal is, we may not know where they might end up, we usually know how we're going to scare them. So I use that because it's really easy to do. Um, but if you're having trouble coming up with fears, I urge you to think on what is something either physical or psychological that this person would crumble if they lost. And it could be things like security, safety, belonging, things of that nature. And if you know what your character is petrified of losing, then you can go into, okay, why is this important to them? What is it about a sense of belonging that is important to them? And maybe it's related to their past. Maybe they have lost family in the past and they have no place and they're trying to make their place. Maybe that's what it builds on. Maybe they have lost a dear friend in a war or something like that. So anyone that they grow close to, they are petrified of losing in the same manner. And that's a good way to build on your character's morals, because morals are really what's going to drive this character. They're what's going to drive your story. Because if I don't feel the reason behind a character's actions, I really can't support them or be against them, because villains should have this motivation too. If you have a villain whose pure motivation is simply, I'm going to be evil because that's what I do, that's boring. It might work for a Saturday morning cartoon, but for a novel, I generally want something a little bit deeper than that. So if your villain wants to conquer the world, great. Why? What is it they're going to gain? What is it that if they do not conquer the world, what is it they're going to lose? Or what is it that they are afraid they're going to lose? And I think that is also vitally important. It doesn't matter if the loss is real. It matters if your character believes it is real. So if they believe that by not, let's say, winning a tournament, that they're going to lose their family's respect and therefore lose their status in their family, it doesn't matter if that's not going to happen. It matters if they believe it's going to happen, because the mind doesn't always follow logic. In fact, most of the time it doesn't follow logic. So that is my little trick into developing the motivation and the why behind your character. So I really hope you guys have enjoyed these character development videos. I've really enjoyed doing them. And I hope you guys will join me again next week when we dive into some more stuff about character building and world building and writing in general. I have heard from quite a few people that world building seems to be something that they're interested in. So maybe we'll touch on that a little bit. Until then, thank you guys for stopping by, and I will see you later.